Hey, and welcome back to the Soccer Wire podcast. We're recording episode 16 on Thursday, January 30th, 2020. I'm producer editor Bridget Baker, and I'm joined by Soccer Wire's resident guest, Charles Boehm. We're joined today by special guest Lori Lindsay. All right, let's kick off episode 16 with special guest Lori Lindsay. Lori, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on.
Yeah, so you've been involved in a lot of aspects of the game. You've played in college, at the professional level in both the U.S. and abroad in Australia, and with the national teams. You've worked as a strength and performance coach for the Washington Spirit Development Academy, and now you're running your own Lori Lindsay Performance. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not really doing Lori Lindsay Performance anymore. Basically, to give you like a quick background, you're exactly right in terms of my playing career. And then once I was done playing, a lot of my background was in strength and conditioning. I grew up in Indiana. A lot of people wouldn't consider that a soccer hotbed. So I was always trying to figure out or find different ways to continue to stay on top of my game. And in my freshman year in high school, I found strength and conditioning, and there's like a lot of stories to that and stuff that I can go into later or not. But essentially, that was really like a path to keep me healthy and have a long career that I was able to have pretty much or essentially basically injury free. And so when I retired, I was like, this is what I'm going to get into. And I've been studying, doing strength and conditioning on the side. And I was like, okay, I want to help young athletes. And while I loved it, what kind of happened, or I think tends to happen with a lot of athletes as well, is that like the first few years you're kind of navigating what you want to do post playing. And I loved helping athletes, but I felt further and further away from the game because a lot of my work was in the gym and athletes were coming to see me, and I needed that initial break or separation from soccer when I initially retired. But after a few years, I was like, okay, this doesn't totally feel like the direction I want to go. And so I kind of course corrected and then essentially kind of got away totally from doing any sort of strength and conditioning and now full-time broadcast. So that's really a brief version of that. I mean, there's a lot of like, again, stories that go into it, but that's where I am.
I'm definitely going to want to pick your brain on these areas because I think it's a fascinating area for players in your situation, kind of trying to plot the course for the next chapters of your life. So that's great, and thank you for giving us that background.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laura, just to build on what you've already said, rather than try and jump around too much, I'm really curious as to if you could just maybe share a little bit more of your personal reflections and lessons as you went from being a player to someone different. And I hesitate to use the term ex-player because you guys are so much more than just players, but I know it can be a really challenging mental process to shift your identity and shift your sort of career mindset. Could you give a little insight into how you, I guess, further insight into how you made that transition?
Absolutely. I mean, I think really what it comes down to is it's different for everybody. Some players really know what they want to do. Some people have started. Some players have started what they're doing, whether that's coaching, taking coaching license while they're playing. And I think there's more and more opportunities in that realm as well, or in today's game, because there's just more opportunity in the women's game. So if that's the direction you want to go, then there's a lot of players that can get involved. Not to say that there wasn't when I retired. I guess it's been like 5 years ago now. But essentially, for me, I think that the most difficult thing is for so long, especially playing with the national team, it is an environment that's so competitive. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard stories about what the playing on the women's national team like is such little details are separating players and what gets you on the field or not. And sometimes that's in your control, sometimes that's not. And I was so used to operating in that 1% that when I retired for myself, trying to operate in the 1% and not really taking a step back and giving myself like a little bit of breathing room. I was so used to like trying to chase this like kind of like mythical what success is. And and so I was like, before I finished playing, I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm going into the fitness industry. I followed all these people. I love it. I love training myself. And, I'm going to train these kids and I'm going to open up gyms or whatever. I'm going to buy into some gyms. And then like, again, for me, I was like operating in this like 1% mentality and not giving myself any kind of like breathing room or leeway to experience some different things that I might be interested in. And within 2 years, and I almost bought into 2 different gyms in the DC area. And I was like having these bodily reactions that were like, what are you doing? Don't do this. Right. And I was like, okay, maybe I should pay attention to that. And again, I think it's an interesting thing because, for so long had almost like tunnel vision because I knew that my soccer career there was a finite time to participate, right? Or to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And then it was tough to get out of that mindset. So for me, the main transition was in 2017, I ended up climbing Kilimanjaro and I played in the highest evolution soccer match ever played. It was a Guinness Book of World Record. It was all for women's equality. And it's kind of like a metaphor of climbing a mountain. And that's how much work we have to do for equality and equity. And it sounds very cliche, but it was very life-changing in the fact that we took the 9-day hike, which was 7 days up, 2 days down, played in this soccer match at 18,500 feet. It was the worst soccer you've ever seen. Beach soccer at high elevation. But just the camaraderie, the people, I think we had, can't remember now, 6 different continents, 20 some countries represented. I mean, it was amazing. 70 plus people, climbing the mountain together. And so it was just a way for me to kind of reflect on, okay, what was I doing? Let me take a step back. And at that point in time, I knew that I was kind of wanting to start to kind of transition, not completely out of strength and conditioning, but go a little bit of a different route. And I was just getting started with the Washington Spirit, or it was going to be right after that. But up until that point in time, this is a long story, but I'm wrapping it up. And essentially I was saying no to a lot of commentating stuff that had come my way since I'd retired. And I was like, no, I'm doing the fitness thing. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. And then when I was in Kilimanjaro, I'm like, you know what? Now is the time for me to start to check out different avenues because I'm not loving the direction I'm going. I'm going to say yes to some of these commentating. And that's what I did. I contacted the people that had reached out prior. I said, hey, listen, I'm actually interested. What do you have available? And I got some opportunities and then ran with it.
So Lori, it's so exciting to hear that you're able to be full-time in commentary because I think it wasn't that long ago that there maybe wasn't enough opportunity. There weren't enough games being broadcast at a high level to provide you with those avenues. I would think that's encouraging for you, not only on an individual level, but maybe in terms of where the game stands at this point too.
Oh, I mean, just to see where the game has developed, and not even on the women's side, but on the men's side, the excitement around the game here in the U.S. and MLS in particular, the NWSL. I mean, obviously our women's team winning the World Cup this past summer. I mean, it's exploded. There's excitement. There's more and more knowledge. There's more and more coverage. People want it, right? And I think it's an interesting time to be in the field in terms of myself not only being a woman, but also being able. I love talking soccer. I love analyzing. That's what I want to do. And also bringing fun and joy to it in a different way than we've seen, right? So it's always a fun.
And do you think you guys, you players like yourself or ex-players like yourself, your generation of pros, are helping to change that industry a bit? Because I think I don't think I'm saying anything too controversial when I point out that the roles for women in the sort of traditional male-dominated norms of sports broadcasting up until maybe not that long ago were very, very shallow in a lot of ways, or maybe not the full range of opportunities. And now you're able to commentate on a range of different levels, both men's and women's games, and be a voice of expertise and not just maybe stuck in some of those stereotypical roles, maybe that were the norm in past decades?
100%. And I think it's still evolving. It's even though we're seeing more and more women in these roles, it's still evolving, right? And so, but at the same time, I think the growth of the game um, is presenting that. I think the growth of the NWSL, obviously our Women's World Cup, that being successful. And we saw Allie Wagner 2 summers ago call the Men's World Cup, first time ever. So again, availability, people taking chances. I mean, I don't even think it's a chance, but giving opportunities, I should say, to women who deserve it and have proven that they are just as knowledgeable. So yeah, I mean, I think it's constant evolution, but it's also a constant fight to get our foot in the door and continue to show that we belong and that we're knowledgeable and that we have quality things to say.
We talked to Santino Quaranta at the convention in Baltimore earlier this month, and he said that commentating, especially doing like live opens, for example, is one of the only feelings he gets that's remotely comparable to the nerves and the excitement and the adrenaline of actually playing. What's your experience like in that regard?
Yes, that is it, because everyone asked me about like what it's like, right? And I said it's the closest thing that I found to playing. And I'm not saying that like I was searching for something that was exactly like playing, but I love the game. And again, I love talking about the game. I love breaking down tactics and where I think we can improve in different areas. And Santino is exactly right. I mean, it is the exact same feeling, the preparation of being able to speak to coaches about their plan leading into games. Then when it's game day, you go live. It is, and it's exhilarating, and there's nerves and then once you get into the game, you start to calm down and smooth things out. It's just like playing. So he's exactly right.
When I look at your career as a player, and you mentioned earlier that you came out of Indiana, which maybe it has a great soccer scene now, but wasn't at the time that you were coming up known as a necessarily a place to find blue chip prospects. How did you get spotted, and how did you get seen and wind up getting into some of that rarefied air of a big college program and national team exposure?
Well, back then for me it was ODP, and now we have ODP is not the mainstream, I would say, anymore. You have ECNL, and then we have the developmental academies. And so there's some different routes that players can be identified. But back then it was primarily just the ODP scene. And fortunately, I had a dad that was really committed to my soccer career, is the easiest way to put it, I should say. And his nickname was Crazy Larry Lindsay. So that gives you a little insight. But he was determined to have my brother and I excel on the field. So he knew about ODP, found out about it. So really it was just the trajectory of trying out for the state team, making that, then going to regional camp, making the regional team, and then just kind of following those steps. Then I went to an interregional event. I made the youth national team. So I played on all the youth national teams and was spotted by April Heinrichs, who ended up being my coach at UVA for a season before taking over the national team. So once I got into the ODP scene and excelled there, it kind of, fortunately for me, took care of itself. I mean, I had to do the work, right? But at the same time, I was identified fairly early on. I think first time I was in ODP was 8th grade. And then from then on, just kept going with the youth teams.
As you mentioned, it's a very different landscape now. In your view, is it better now?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think that's kind of complex too. I think the players are better. I think the opportunities, there's more and more. I think the thing that we have to be careful of, though, is I wouldn't necessarily use the word better. I think there's opportunities, but I also think that we need to be careful of saying this is the direction that is best for players if you want to play on the national team, because I think that's a tough one. There's so many players that develop early. There's players that develop late. There's players that, maybe aren't sure that they want to go this direction. There's players that come from families that can't afford to play. And that doesn't, I'm not trying to say that we don't have like a wide range of scouts and we're missing this huge selection of players that are going unidentified. I don't think that's the case, but I think that to pinpoint and say, hey, if you want to play on the national team, go the developmental academy route. If you want to be identified and play on the best, go the ECNL, right? I mean, there's just so many different directions. And I think really what it comes down to is the individual player developing in the way that feels best for them, enjoying the game, which is the most important, and loving the game. And then things will take care of themselves, right? And be an advocate for yourself. So I don't think that we need to be spending gazillions of dollars with personal trainers and skill coaches, and then going to pay even more money for developmental academies and running all around. I mean, honestly, it should be a pretty simplified process of enjoying the game, finding the best place that's going to be the most competitive for your child, and then the other things should take care of. You should be identified from there. And there's a lot of luck, but there's also a lot of like the child taking it into their own hands too, in terms of, hey, I want to continue to get better, I'm going to train, right? Instead of, I feel like we've a little bit of been sold this like rat race and this is the way you get on the national team, when that looks very different for every player. And honestly, it comes down to just enjoying and loving the game.
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to damn you with faint praise here, but my impressions of you as a player were that you were, you played with your brain above all, and you had that sort of central midfield, cerebral approach, and you weren't necessarily a dazzling physical specimen in terms of your size or your speed or your strength or whatnot. But I don't know if that was. Maybe those aren't always the players that our system recognizes and elevates. I don't know what your experiences were like. Could you share any of those, your memories as a player, and then maybe what you see now when you look at the current state of affairs?
I mean, we'll keep going. I can listen to this all day. I'm just joking. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, I appreciate that. I think that's a really fair assessment. And, when people ask about my playing days and like what it was like, that's exactly how I would explain it. I mean, I think most people would consider me an above average athlete, right? You don't play on the national team if you don't have athleticism. But when you're talking about that 1% I was talking about earlier, in terms of the competitiveness and the athletes that are at the national team level, I mean, whoa, lights out. I mean, when you look around, Abby Wambach, right? Carly Lloyd, who's still going at 37, Megan Rapinoe, I mean, Heather Mitz, and I mean, I played with Mia, I played with Julia, right? These players the athleticism that these players have is, again, the 1% is extraordinary. And so for me, it was about, hey, how I loved watching the game. Paul Scholes was my favorite player growing up. So I emulated what he did, and then took the pieces that I felt like, yes, this is true to my game. And so it was a felt experience for me. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to bulldoze anybody over. I'm not going to run past anybody. But for me, it was like, okay, as you mentioned, very cerebral. How can I think faster? How can I be smoother on the ball than my opponent to beat them? And I really believe that was what allowed me to have longevity, and then also to play at the highest level. And then the second part of your question was,
in terms of what does it look like when you look at maybe kids who are in a similar situation now to what you were at then?
Oh, correct. And I think you also asked, like, what was that? Sometimes that wasn't always praised, and I think that was difficult in my career as well, because I wanted to stay true to my game. I knew that I wasn't going to be this physical presence. That's not how I was going to show the best. So for me, it was just about continuing to hone those skills and really believe in myself. And that transitions to like that other part of your question, which is for players today. I mean, I think there's a lot of players that are like that. And then we try to develop into these kind of athletic type players that will be busier than they need to be and I use busy in quotes, on the field. And I think if you just stay true, develop the skills though that are going to translate to the field, which is like your range of passing. If you're a midfielder, right? How can you open up a game with your range of passing? How can you think faster and take fewer touches when necessary, or be able to open up a game by dribbling, right? I mean, if that's your game, continue to hone those skills and stay true to that, because that will actually start to shine and go forth. Because when people are doing more athletic type things, you're bringing a calmness to a game that looks different. So keep going, work on the skills, but also the biggest thing I always tell youth, and I'm sure we've heard this time and time again, like watch the game. There's so many opportunities to watch the game. And if you watch the players that are playing your position, it is amazing how accelerated your career could be. And I'm not just saying, no, just go and watch. Yes, watch as a fan, but also study what they're doing. How are they receiving the ball under pressure? What are the spaces they're getting in to be able to receive the ball and turn and buy themselves more time? Like if you just did that, that was, I feel like, the biggest change in my career is studying the game early on and throughout, because you think quicker, you understand the movements, they become natural.
Definitely some good advice and good insight there. We're going to step away, take a quick break, and we'll be right back talking more about youth soccer, national teams, and the NWSL with Lori Lindsay.
SoccerWire is the place for prospective recruits to list themselves and promote their profile to thousands of daily readers, including college coaches, scouts, and more. All recruits can list themselves for life for a small one-time fee. Already committed? Congratulations! All commitments can be reported for free and are included in our nationwide soccer recruiting and tournament wire to over 65,000 people each Thursday. Visit SoccerWire.com to create your player profile today.
Welcome back. We are chopping it up with Lori Lindsay. I've got so many more questions for her and Lori, starting with adding to what you talked about at the end of the last segment. You now that you're away from the game a bit, and I would love to get you on the spot here in terms of the style question. You discussed kind of your own evolution, finding out how you could impact games with your particular skill set, and of course we have to get into this matter of athleticism versus technique and vision and all that. This old maybe debate, let's call it, within women's soccer. I've heard for years and years, well, really more than a decade now, that the rest of the world is coming for our women, that the gap is closing, that our reliance on fitness and athleticism will eventually be our undoing to some extent, and yet it hasn't happened yet. And I'm wondering how you see this evolution. Are we still too reliant on pace and power and all those sorts of traditional attributes, or do you see an evolution process with the women's national team?
Well, I don't necessarily think that we're too reliant. I think we're relying on it in the way that we know that we can use it to be successful and to win major championships. And at the same time, I think we're in a unique spot where a lot of times I think of that our technical ability that we have is underrated. I mean, the players that we have on this national team and their ability to what they can do on the ball is some of the best in the world by far. And but I also think, credit to women's soccer, yes, the world is catching up, and we want that. I mean, we want resources to be put into the women's game, and of course that means that the gap is going to get smaller. I think the main area that we can improve on is how do we use that athleticism, how do we use that technical ability that we have and be smarter tactically, because we can make things easier for ourselves. And I think athleticism will always be there. I think the competition within our squad will always be there. I mean, that's what that program is built on. If you look back from the pioneers of like Michelle Akers, Julie Faddy, Christine Lilly, Mia Hams, I mean, that is what this program is built on. But at the same time, knowing that we can use that, but then also tactically have an understanding of putting ourselves in even better positions or the correct positions to be able to break down the opposition when they potentially sit back, right? I mean, we knew that was going to be the case going into last summer's World Cup. What do we do? How do we break teams down when they sit back? And so I really believe that will be the next evolution, is to continue. And that goes to the piece I was saying earlier, which is to be able to watch the game. How do you be patient? How do you find different ways to win games when the option to be able to outrun somebody is not on?
Mm-hmm. So, and you having been inside that culture, I continue to be amazed by the tradition and the culture of success and achievement and winning that gets passed down from generation to generation on the USWNT. And could you give us a little insight into it? Because, like, as we speak, the women have just kicked off their Olympic qualifying campaign. Even though they were far from their best against Haiti the other night, there was still, the result was never in doubt. And there's just these moments in the game where it's just, this program, this team is just such a machine. They just, whoever's in front of them, there's just this sense of relentlessness. And I wonder if you could give us a window into what that's like on the inside.
Well, it's that. I mean, it's the trainings, and at some point in time are more challenging than the games. I mean, players are vying every single day for starting spots. There's a real belief in individuals. And like I said, there's the smallest little details that are separating these players. And it really weeds out players who aren't ready to do it mentally, because it demands that you're consistent for really 11 months out of the year, which is wild to even say, because, I mean, if you think about it like a typical job, right? I'm not saying that doesn't demand excellence, but there's like points in time where you can kind of like come in and out. And that's really not the case with the national team. You're expected to compete and perform every single week. And it really is like 11 months on. So it demands a level of a mentality of self-belief and just taking one day at a time, and not really getting too high or too low, and knowing that things can change pretty quickly day to day. But at the same time, I think the one overarching thing that sometimes we forget is that this team has really been built on, and consistently or constantly have to give credit to, again, like the players I'm talking about, Mia Hamm, Julie Fatties. I mean, they really instilled that, yes, this team is about a winning mentality, but it's also about passing the torch, and passing the torch not only here in the States, but like growing this game and passing that along and using the platform globally. And we saw that 100% last summer with Megan Rapinoe, taking that group and being like, this is where we're going. You're either on board or you're not, right? And we saw that globally as well, because we saw the excitement around not even around just the U.S. team, but around the World Cup tournament itself. And so that is what it's always been about. It's about, yes, fighting for spots individually and making that team, but also you're playing for something so much bigger, and it's about growing the game and the visibility and fighting for what we deserve. And I think that's always been the mentality.
So, and following on from that, another aspect of this that fascinates me is, I think we have to acknowledge that these national team stars can have such long and successful careers in large part because there's still some of the only women in the professional game who are on full-time contracts, who are being paid anywhere close to what they're worth. And those full-time national team contracts, I don't know how many there are these days, but no more than 24 or so, 20 odd slots for that sort of being on the 1%, or maybe the 1% of the 1%, as you have alluded to. I think you've been both inside and outside that line. It seems like it must make such a huge difference, because then when you look at what NWSL players deal with, and there's a lot of those players on the equivalent of minimum wage trying to get up to that level with so much less resources to do so.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that's not always talked about a ton. I mean, obviously there's the lawsuit that the women are involved in now. And you make a good point. I mean, the team is compensated, right? They're compensated well. It's some of the best in the world, but there is a level of like, hey, we deserve more, right? And this is the work we're doing, and this is where the team wants to go, and this is we should be compensated and treated fairly for that. And at the same time, it's an interesting, you bring up a good point, because something I haven't talked about actually on this podcast, but the environment, while it's an amazing environment, don't get me wrong, and you're competing with players that have somewhat similar and vastly different backgrounds growing up and what their journey to the national team has been like. But at the same time, it can be a very fear-driven environment, because it is one of the only places where you can make a living playing soccer. And there's obviously very few. I mean, 23 people went to the World Cup, right? And you can add in like potentially a handful more that were under full-time contracts and didn't go to the World Cup. But at the same time, it's limited. I mean, 30 players in the entire country that's are really making a substantial living playing soccer. It becomes very interesting environment. Like, you don't want to lose your spot. You're fighting for it. And I think that's why how Megan has used her platform is exceptional, because there was a very real, when she kneeled, there's a very period of time, a couple months, where she didn't get called back in. I mean, it's a very real, how should I say it, possibility that she was never going to be called back in again, and then not be able to play at the national team level. And that's why you don't always see people speak out. But so, I mean, really, I think that's why it makes Megan and her speaking out even more extraordinary. But at the same time, it is a fear-driven, and it's something that, now that we have a players association with the NWSL and a constant growth in the league, it's something to look at to continue to minimize that gap between the players that are playing on the national team and in the NWSL, and how can we compensate even more for the players that aren't playing on the national team.
This is probably a good place to segue into the recently held NWSL draft. You were one of the commentators on that. I think you guys were on air for 12 hours or something absurd like that. And I wanted to get a few thoughts from you there. And maybe I get the sense that being on site there, that there was a little bit of a new attitude around the NWSL. There seems to be a lot more bullishness with the salary scale having been raised this year, with allocation money being introduced. There seems to be a little bit more eagerness to not just survive as a league and individual clubs, but to thrive. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, there's just some exciting things happening, and obviously, hopefully, we can continue to build off the momentum of success from last summer's World Cup. But at the same time, with the raise in salaries, the allocation money introduced to each team, and be able to find different ways using the allocation money to be able to make trades. I mean, this was the first draft that we know, or we have known, that there's going to be expansion next year with Louisville coming in. So a lot of teams, making some moves, preparing for that, knowing that they're not going to be able to protect all their national team players. So do we look to make moves now to get some sort of compensation for those players, knowing that we just lose them and not get anything next year because you wouldn't be able to protect them in the expansion draft. So yeah, some more, I would say, the best way to put it felt like teams were taking more risks and being braver in the moves that they were making. And in addition, it was also the first time that we've seen more than two players who were not seniors come out, or excuse me, more than just one player. We saw two come out earlier, sophomore and junior this year, come out early from college. And, I know there's a lot of players, or not players, but a lot of people that are against players coming out early from college right now. But you know what? I'm actually all for it, because your soccer playing career is a short time. Go for it. If teams want you and they're going to draft you in that first round, or even use you as a first draft pick, then go for it, because you can go back to school, but you can't come back to playing. And we're at a unique time with the growth of the women's game for I think players to start taking risks in that category as well.
Yeah, and now I've been trying to ask people around the NWSL whether there's a generational shift happening, because Ashley Sanchez, one of the girls you mentioned who came out early, and I have to remind myself, I guess technically they're not girls, but it feels like they're getting younger and younger. I think she's the youngest. She and Sophia Smith are not only not seniors, but they're two of the youngest in age to turn pro. And her first question in the media scrum after getting selected fourth by the Spirit was, what are you looking forward to most about going pro? And she said, money. And it was like really, really simple, plain answer, and pretty empowered, I thought. Something maybe we haven't seen as much of in past generations. I wonder if you see that shift happening with these players, maybe being more ready to have that sort of attitude.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to that's an individual thing, right? I think in all sports that is such an individual thing, whether players are ready or not. And that's a side note. I'm not an advocate for everyone to start coming out of college early. Like that's not the case at all. Like I'm not saying that, because that really is just an individual choice. I think you need to weigh your options in that case. And I should say I would actually lean towards the side of like, actually no, majority of players should not come out of college early just yet. But at the same time, there might be a few that I'm like, okay, yeah, go, here we go. But I mean, I think we're just seeing the evolution, right? There's players that are not afraid to speak out. Hey, I'm excited about the money. Great. We hear that time and time again from men's athletes. That shouldn't be any different from women. Now, the pay is quite a bit different. So I think it depends on like what you consider money and not. But at the same time, opportunities. And if you feel like you're going to excel and you want to take those chances, then go for it.
Speaking of money, I gotta ask you about this too. You've been at the probably at or near the top of the salary scale in your profession. You've also been a sort of a rank and file NWSLer, and now you're as a broadcaster. My guess is you kind of have that freelancer mentality. How have you taken care of yourself? How have you tried to set yourself up for both success on the field and in your pursuits, but also sustainability financially?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was very fortunate. My parents taught me financial maturity, like growing up, and what that looks like. And so while like I felt like I was good in terms of my money when I was playing with the national team and playing professional soccer, I was able to save stuff, and then I also do some real estate stuff on the side as well that I really enjoy, with like Airbnb and owning some. I now reside in Philly, so owning property in Philadelphia, Airbnb that out. And then also, I work regularly, right? So I take care of myself that way, and really have more than enough. And I've been very fortunate. And at the same time, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say like I've been smart, right? Because I think so, but that is like a totally different definition for everybody and what that looks like financially. So for me, how I have been able to utilize the money that I've made, which I was very fortunate with, playing soccer and playing at the national team, being compensated with that, and to be able to put that and utilize that still makes me money today.
Mm-hmm. And I think you had to adjust to going from the national team contract down to the NWSL contracts when they were smaller even than they are now, right? What did you have to kind of have a tough process there of belt tightening, of reassessing these kind of matters?
I know. Well, that's a funny question, because I used to joke. I was like, this is the only profession that I had like a 13-year playing career, like 13-year profession where I made more money my rookie year than I did my last year, so everyone who's listening understands is I had finished playing with the national team. I was off contract. I was in the very last, like hitting my mid 30s and about to retire. So I wasn't playing with the national team anymore. And it was like the first couple of years of the NWSL. So the salaries were really low, and I was actually on the higher end of that. But at the same time, I had managed my money enough that, yes, in terms of probably like in season, not making as much money, but I had managed, again, my money and financial situation where I was able to continue to play and not be so concerned about what I was making.
So this is maybe I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to compare also to your previous experiences in the other leagues. You were in WPS, right? I think the salaries were higher there, but things didn't work out because that league eventually failed.
Yeah, I'm one of 5 players to play in all 3 leagues. So I was in the WSA as well. Those were the highest salaries, and I mean, obviously that didn't work out either. And then WPS um, salaries were not as high, but not the best structure in terms of, um, I guess, across the board, like just the ownerships and I guess like how the vision, I should say, of the owners and where that was going. And now the NWSL getting a bit more or a lot more on track in the vision and owners coming together. So, but also realizing that like it's a process, right? Like we can't like dump all the money in the first year and expect this to be a go. So it is a process. There's going to be some ups and downs, and but yeah, I mean, it is an interesting. I mean, I've been involved in a long time, and it was I was like, wait a second, I really did make more money my rookie year than I did my last year. This seems backwards.
I never got to cover WSA, but the stories that journalists told me was that basically the league just lit money on fire.
Yeah, I would say that's about right. And you know, it was a fabulous product. You can say that about all the leagues. I mean, it is unbelievable the talent that has been in all these leagues. And it's learning, right? It's growing pains. It's learning what's going to work. It's, you know, I think the tough part about the WSA was waiting that year after the '99 World Cup, and there was like that down year, and I think feeling like they missed that kind of golden opportunity. But at the same time, yeah, I think across the board, just projections of salaries and the incoming money at the same time and what that looked like. So it's tough, and again, we've seen it with the MLS and the downsizing, and then now in their 25th year. So incredible what they've done, and that's the hope on the women's side.
All right, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be back with Lori Lindsey.
Get your club or league in the game with SoccerWire, the leading community news, advice, and search engine for youth soccer. For a base annual fee, we'll take a huge bite out of your marketing and branding so you can focus more on where the cleats touch the turf. The best part? All the extra branding and benefits are free because the full price of the annual membership is returned to you in advertising credits. We have 3 great options that are sure to meet the marketing and advertising needs of your organization. For more information, visit SoccerWire.com and click Be a Premier Partner under the Premier Partner section on the left side of the page, or email ads@SoccerWire.com. That's ads@SoccerWire.com.
Welcome back to the Soccer Wire podcast. I'm Charles Boehm. We're here chatting with Lori Lindsey. We've had a fantastic conversation, and we've already taken enough of this busy woman's time. But we want to hear more from you, Lori, about what you've got going on in the years ahead. As you mentioned, you've been able to carve out a full schedule, full-time work in the broadcasting business, and I'd love to hear more about what you've got coming in 2020.
Yeah, we're still, I mean, more and more broadcast is the goal. I mean, I've been fortunate because I've been able to do a ton of different work with a ton of different networks and people. So I've done a lot of the NWSL work. I've done stuff with ESPN, or did the ACC network this past fall, and just kind of continuing to see what that work looks like. I've done stuff with MLS, whether it's been studio work or covering their US Open Cup games. Worked with LAFC and the Philadelphia Union. So just a wide range, which has been fantastic in terms of getting to pick different people's brains, learn from experts that have a different way of doing stuff. And again, that's why this career is very much like my playing career, because it was about establishing those relationships, being able to work with a variety of different people and learning from them. So that is always the goal, continuing to improve the craft and work with as many people as possible.
I know I certainly loved every Wednesday when I was at the Spirit when seeing you on the broadcast call. So I definitely appreciate everything you've been doing in the broadcasting and everything that you've got ahead of you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And hey, let me get one more here. I want to put you on the spot since we've got a lot of big things happening with WOSO this year. Can you give us maybe in one sentence or thereabouts your expectations for the women's national team? Are they going to go back to the gold podium? What do you see happening with them for the Olympics? And then maybe what's your outlook on who's going to grab the spotlight in the NWSL this year?
Ooh, good question. Okay, so for the World Cup, I am a huge fan of Vlatko and Inoski, and I think that we're going to see wonderful things come from this team and the evolution. I'm really excited to see. At the same time, I do think it's difficult to do back-to-back. That's why I haven't seen it happen before. But I am actually going to call it. I think we qualify. Doesn't matter what it looks like, just qualify, and then Vlatko can get down to business. So I'm calling it another gold medal, and I think that would be massive and wildly amazing for not only our women's national team, but also globally too, because I think there's always certain things that you can continue to strive for. And we have a unique platform here in the U.S. where a lot of these countries looked up to us, and I think that's also important too, in terms of the direction we're going to with women's soccer, right? Like, I'm not going to talk about anything else. And for the NWSL, I mean, what makes the NWSL unique is, I mean, really, it can be a lot of different teams year. I think you always have to put up Paul Riley in North Carolina. I mean, he's going to have that team firing on all cylinders. I think Portland made some unique changes. In terms of their draft picks, I'll be interested in what they look like defensively, though. And I expect the Spirit to hit some strides in a way that I don't think we've seen recently. And I'm also excited to see what Chicago will do this year.
Fantastic. Everybody check out Lori on all her various social feeds. She's on Twitter at Lori Lindsay 6. Check her out at Insta as well, and then watch your local and national broadcasts to see when your girl pops up on your television. And again, thanks so much for carving out some time for us, Lori, and good luck on the road ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I love the questions, love the conversation. So thanks for having me on.
All right, that wraps up today's episode of the Soccer Wire podcast. Until the next one, make sure you're following us on social media. You can just search Soccer Wire on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Keep up with everything we cover on soccerwire.com by subscribing to our newsletters at soccerwire.com/newsletters. For Charles Boehm, I'm Bridget Baker saying thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Soccer Wire podcast.